Dames en heren, de tentoonstelling maakt deel uit van een lange reeks monografische architectuur-tentoonstellingen die Bozar en A+ sinds 2008 organiseren. Rotor is evenwel geen doorsnee architectuurbureau, maar een praktijk die sinds 2006 in tentoonstellingen, studies, publicaties en beleidsaanbevelingen hergebruik binnen de architectuur heeft gethematiseerd, bevraagd en gepromoot. Dans le cadre de notre partenariat avec A+ Architecture in Belgium, avec qui nous élaborons la programmation architecture, nous avons invité Rotor à revenir sur son parcours, sa pratique et ses activités réalisées en presque 20 ans d'existence. Plutôt que de proposer une exposition rétrospective, les architectes de Rotor ont souhaité prolonger leur réflexion sur le réemploi dans l'industrie du bâtiment, en présentant et questionnant leur rapport dans ce contexte. I give the floor and the microphone to Amaryllis Jacobs, Artistic Director of A+ Architecture in Belgium, who will say a few words about Rotor and introduce our speakers for this evening. Thank you.
Hartelijk welkom op deze openingsavond van Entangled Matter. De tentoonstelling gewijd aan het onderzoek, de visie en de werking van Rotor. Rotor staat al bijna 20 jaar bekend om zijn werk op het gebied van ecologie, architectuur en het hergebruik van materiaal. Met een breed spectrum aan projecten streven zij er voortdurend naar om de organisatie van materiaalstromen te onderzoeken en in vraag te stellen. Sinds 2005 hebben vele mensen deel uitgemaakt van het collectief Rotor, voor kortere of veel langere periodes. Ze hebben allemaal op hun eigen manier bijgedragen aan het vormgeven van wat Rotor is, een hybride van twee entiteiten. Rotor is enerzijds een ontwerp- en onderzoekspraktijk die de materiële wereld kritisch benadert bij middel van architectuur- en interieurprojecten, tentoonstellingen en publicaties, economische modellen en beleidsvoorstellen. Daarnaast is er de spin-off Rotor Deconstruction, een coöperatief bedrijf dat gerecupereerde bouwmaterialen en componenten ontmantelt, herstelt en opnieuw verkoopt. Rotor neemt een bijzondere plaats in binnen het architectuurlandschap. Hun werk ligt zowel in het binnen- als in het buitenland aan de basis van een omwenteling in het denken over materiaalgebruik en bouwen en draagt vandaag structureel bij tot het gedachtegoed en de praktische uitwerking van de energie- en klimaattransitie. Hier, absente des débats publics, la question des ressources matérielles fait aujourd'hui un retour en force. Ce retour est toutefois loin d'être homogène. D'un côté, la multiplication de plans d'action et d'initiatives pour tenter de mettre fin au gaspillage, assurer une gestion responsable des ressources, promouvoir une architecture sobre en matières premières. De l'autre, une pression accrue sur les ressources matérielles, des plans d'action pour relancer l'industrie minière, des usages de plus en plus dispersifs, de matières de plus en plus difficiles à extraire et globalement une croissance contenue de la consommation de ressources. Ces tendances contradictoires influencent le travail que Rotor mène depuis 2005 autour de la compréhension des flux de matière, des déchets, du réemploi et des grandes notions qui focalisent les débats, la durabilité et la circularité. Rotor is interested in the trajectories that materials follow before and after being assembled together to produce architecture. In the origin of the materials, the impact of their production on the environment, and the social aspects that are embedded in these processes. Rotor wants to rethink architecture with these aspects in mind, trying to achieve a more balanced relation with materials, energy, and natural resources in general. Rotor members Michael Guillot and Victoria Van Kan will tell you more about the many facets of Rotor's work and thinking in the following lecture. Afterwards, we invite you to discover the exhibition, Entangled Matter. Why this rather poetic title? To end this introduction, I'll read you a few excerpts from a text written by Michael. To defend this title, we all found a bit hard to understand and pronounce at the beginning of the making of this exhibition, but now fully embrace. If we had to pick one word to describe material flows today, entangle would be a good contender. Entangled tells stories of locked systems, dependencies, complexity, and irreversibility. And indeed, as the exhibition will show, our economy is built on complex, interconnected, interdependent, interwoven, layered upon systems. Entangled tells stories of involvement. Nobody can really escape once entangled in a situation. Everything is connected to everything. We are all in this together, whether we realize it or not, and whether we like it or not. In this exhibition, different elements are presented bearing testimonies of these entanglements. They all have fragmented stories which suggest things can be done otherwise. The exhibition delves into specific entangled situations from which we can learn. However, it gives no definite answer, but some of the stories give rise to hope, although often a kind of yin and yang way. Alles is vervlochten, tout est enchevêtré. and Bozar are entangled with many institutions and sponsors we wish to thank for their support. De Vlaamse overheid, la Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, Urban, la Ville de Bruxelles de Stad Brussel, de Vlaamse Gemeenschapscommissie, our main sponsor Triodos, and Cordeel, Finstral, Seco, Vitra Circle, Arco, Konix, DDS Plus, and Whitewood, as well as A+'s structural sponsors, Fabelsen and Dieteren Immo. Enjoy the lecture by Michael and Victoria.
Goedenavond, bonsoir, good evening. We are absolutely delighted to be here tonight and to see so many people. I've been told we are sold out. It's quite impressive to see the Henri Leboeuf sold out from this part of the room. So thanks for being there. And you know what? Playing at home is both a pleasure and a challenge. A pleasure because it's a great opportunity to celebrate the opening of our new exhibition tonight. And a challenge because, let's be honest, the pressure is on. One of the challenges is that you probably all have varying degrees of knowledge about our projects and what we do at Rotor. And to be honest, we're not making it easy for you either. Because the project Rotor has been around for almost 20 years, and during this time, we've been flirting with architecture. We've been talking about architecture. We've been collaborating with architects, supplying architects with salvaged building materials, but never really produced any architecture on our own, or at least not in the classical sense of the term. Our position at the periphery of architecture can be complicated to read from a side, and even sometimes from within. Also, we've been doing quite a lot of different stuff, and to face this diversity, we even created two different structures. So Rotor as a non-profit organization on one hand, and Rotor DC as a cooperative company on the other. It is possible that some of you in this room have been following us since the very beginning, the very early projects around 2005, the Loop Lab Festival, which at that time was somehow displaying the interest of Rotor in industrial waste and how leftovers from industrial production could be used for artistic creation. Others in the room may have discovered us through this strange building at 181 Rue de Flandre in the very city center of Brussels, which was another way to explore what could be done with industrial waste and leftovers, and also how to activate a vacant plot in the city, which we have to say were more numerous at that time than today in Brussels. Other people in this room may have become aware of our existence through one of the major international exhibitions we held in the early 2010s. For instance, here, Usus Usur for the Venice Biennale in 2010. Or this one at the Prada Foundation in 2011 about their unused stocks. Or this one about the work of OMA, an exhibition we held at the Barbican in London. Or even this one, an exhibition about sustainability that we prepared for the Oslo Triennale of Architecture in 2013. There might be people in this room who took part in some of the course or the workshop we've been organizing with architecture schools these last years. For instance, this one with the AA school in London, which was about discovering the salvage trade in the UK. Or this one, which was at the ETH Zurich. It was a deconstruction workshop in which we let students explore how to carefully dismantle parts of the buildings. Or this one, which was again about the salvage trade in Edinburgh in 2022. Or even this one, very recent from the Politecnico Milano, about the preservation, a sort of radical approach to preservation existing architecture. Some of you in this room may have come across our work without even knowing it was our work. For example, if you once went to Libre Book, this beautiful bookshop in Ixelles, very great choice of books. The photo is a bit old. You see, if you go there today, you will see that it's packed with more books than that. Or if some of you went to have a drink at the Dequera, this craft beers bar in Forest, which also changed a lot. This is very cold compared to the lively atmosphere you can see there today. Or some of you may have visited the Abattoir de Baumel in Namur, which is also an interior we designed and built in 2014. Maybe you visited some of the scenography we created over the years. For instance, this one in Ostend for the Musée, temporary scenography, using and reusing existing elements from the original building, or this strange entrance desk that we designed with the leftovers from the previous scenography for an art space in Antwerp. There might even be some people in this room who live or who work in some projects with delivered interior projects, such as here, the interior spaces for the offices Martyr in Brussels, or here for the company Zonige Kemper in Westerlo, also made out of salvage elements, or even more recently, people who would work at Rialco, Louvain-la-Neuve-based company. Maybe some of you also know a project to which we contributed as reuse assistant, which is a role we increasingly play, which consists of helping building owner and architects to integrate salvage and reuse principle in their projects. For instance, we did that for the renovation of the Zinneke facilities together with West Architects and of course Zinneke. Or another project we did with Whitewood, the renovation of the former Philips Tower in De Broekère, to which we helped them salvage and reuse as much as possibly can. I dare to believe that there are people in this room who even read some of our publications, maybe not this one, because this one is very, very niche. It's a contribution to the topic of insurance and reuse, quite a specific aspect that we developed together with many partners as part of a European-funded project. Maybe some of you came across this publication, which is a bit more greater audience, I would say, about deconstruction and reuse, or this much more recent publication, a scholarly contribution to the history of architecture revolving around the figure of Marcel Remaker, a strange salvage dealer slash designer architect. Obviously, a larger fraction of you in this room may have come across the products and the elements that are sold daily by Rotor DC. This is probably the most public part of our work, and I'm sure some of you already saw that passing by either on the social media or in our showroom in Evere now. There might even be some customers of us in the room tonight. I warn you, the aftercare service will be closed for after the lecture. You have to wait until tomorrow if you have to lodge a complaint, but I'm sure you don't. And finally, there might be people in this room who are there by chance or by obligation and are hearing about us for the first time. To all of you, I want to say good evening, thanks for coming, and welcome. Before rounding up this rapid-fire presentation, I would like to mention that all these projects are not the work of just 1 or 2 people. Rotor started as a small group of 2, then 3, then 4 founders, and the team gradually grew and diversified, with more people joining the team and diversifying progressively the team you see us throughout the years until today. Many people joined, some people left the team as well, which makes Rotor a kind of a ship of Theseus. If you know this notion, it's about the boat of Theseus, a boat whose components are regularly replaced until there is not a single original piece left in the ship, leaving philosophers to ponder whether it is still the same ship, if all the pieces have been changed. Rotor is not a ship, of course, but it is fair to ask what holds it all together. What is the common thread that links all these people and all these projects? These are questions that we don't often get a chance to ask ourselves. We're often too busy with the daily flow of work to take this step back. However, the proposal to hold an exhibition at Bozar, and more specifically to prepare for this lecture, was an excellent pretext to tackle some of these questions.
But first, let's start with a brief explanation of the term entanglement or entangled matter, as the title says, and how we envisioned it for the exhibition. For that, a good example is this waste dump of the enamel factory in Briare. Briare is a town about a 2-hour drive south from Paris. It's a very fascinating site. It's a byproduct of an industry that developed throughout the 19th century around the production of enamels. It's a pretty typical industrial story, born from the growth of 2 companies and seeing significant growth, significant expansion in the 19th century. And it was also one of the first factories to be listed on the stock exchange. The factory was running on steam-powered machines, fueled by coal. And because it's located along a canal, it sourced raw materials from Limousin for the clay, Allier for the coal, and even from Norway for the feldspat. The same canal also made it possible to export its products over the world. And back then, the factory also provided housing for its workers, who made up a significant proportions of the town's population, as you can see. So for decades, production waste was dumped behind this factory, possibly in a pit, and over time it piled up into an actual hill. Nature has now partly reclaimed the area, creating a landscape halfway between woodland and a dump. This is a detail of the composition of the ground you're walking on. So you can recognize some familiar objects like buttons, and this goes over several meters depth. The scale of the site is really impressive if you consider that, say, 20% of the production is discarded. It means that an amount of faience equivalent to 4 times these hills also came out of the factory. And unlike waste, which was concentrated in one spot, the finished products were spread across the globe. They are found in glued to walls, stored in warehouses, and for some in other more or less informal dumps. You can also see in my previous pictures parts of the mosaics that can be found in some of the metro stations in Brussels. These are quite recent photos of the subway station de Brocaire and Porte de Namur, which are getting gradually renovated for the moment, but there are others quite impressive mosaics in other Brussels subway stations, thinking about Diamant, for example, with made by enamels coming from the factory of Brière. This is a picture we took in storage facility of the STIP at Thieffry. You can recognize the packaging of Brière as well. So although it is rarely publicized, the place is known in the area. Many people have been collecting materials for their DIY projects. It's a form of gleaning where what is gathered isn't grain left behind from the harvest, but materials discarded from the factory. The site has a certain charm, but it does also raise some health concerns. For instance, we know that some orange dyes used in ceramics around the 70s, 80s are radioactive, and also that some enamels contain heavy metals. So it's hard not to worry about the condition of the soil or the health of regular visitors and, of course, the workers. This is, in a few words, what we consider to be an entangled situation. So this is a place where the presence of a productive or industrial activity intertwines with questions of landscape transformation, ecological issues, and questions of use. In other words, intriguing situations that tell us something about our era. This example could have been in the selection of sites inside the exhibition if we hadn't set the totally arbitrary rule of sticking to 200-kilometer radius around Brussels. So all of the sites you will see in the exhibition and also very well captured by Bêka Lemoine all present this kind of entanglements. This selection was an attempt to situate our practice within this deeply entangled context in which we are ourselves also entangled. One of the conclusions of our research for the exhibition could be that it can be misleading to talk about circular transition. The circular still largely depends on the linear. Both are, in a way, entangled.
Many of the entanglements that we show in the exhibition or that we've explored at Rotor over the years involve objects or materials. And at Rotor, we love starting our investigations around them because they are usually an excellent entry point into these situations. We believe that objects can tell stories and can help us to understand how the economy is organized today. Take, for instance, this retailer, which is a company specialized in the reclamation of antique stones, usually salvaged from old Burgundy castle and churches. And when you look at them, those large slabs, what makes them truly valuable is actually the surface, the face with patina, the face that bears evidence of the connection to the ancientness of these old buildings. The problem is also that these slabs are too thick for contemporary construction standards. Hence their cutting, as you can see on the picture, which is at the core of this company's activities. And the value of the patina translates well in the prices of those two products. So if you take the upper crust, so the one with the patina, at that time it was sold €250 per square meter. If you now take the lower crust, which bears no traces of patina because it's just freshly cut, this one was sold for €25 per square meter, 10 times less. So this shows pretty well the value of patina and how we relate to these objects and the kind of value we can attach to them. And of course, patina is just the noble version of wear and tear, but while the former has a positive connotation, patina, the latter, wear and tear, has a rather negative connotation. Who among you would be ready to appreciate the beauty of this chipped corner on a tile? Or the intricate crackle in the enamel of this sink? Or all the small defects that you can find on a HPL panel? Or even the smooth wear of these rubber floors? In most cases, and this is in big contrast with the Burgundy slab, these marks, these elements of wear and tear just lead to the objects being discarded. Because we still live in a context where the appetite for new and untainted material is super strong. The mindset that was criticized by Aldous Huxley in his dystopian novel from 1932 already, in which he imagined the citizens of a totalitarian society being sent subliminal messages during their sleep, messages saying, ending is better than mending. The more stitches, the less riches. And that all over the night. Imagine the kind of a system of value you have after that. But actually, these ideas, we still encounter them quite regularly in our work. And a big part of our job is to build counter-arguments and try to create a sense of value for materials and objects that would otherwise be thrown away. And let me tell you, this is no hard science. It's quite unpredictable. Let me give you one example. This is an example of a material that for some reason convey immediately this sense of appreciation. This batch is perhaps the best contender in this category. It's a batch of Corten steel cubes that we salvaged from the Brussels North railway station. They were hanging in the halls of the station. You have to imagine hundreds of them on that raster on the left of the image. Some of them had the light inside. And interestingly, this is the kind of element that has no immediate reuse. It would be hard to imagine nowadays to reuse them as a suspended ceiling in a new design. However, there are many other possible uses to it. And we were not very original when we started advertising this batch through Rotor DC commercial channels. So we just put it as a sort of coffee table, if you want. And somehow, this material generated a lot of interest from the public. We don't know really why. Is it because it came from a well-known place, or because it was lending itself to many different uses, or because we marketed it well, or maybe put too low of a price to it? We don't know. But the fact is that the day we put it on sale, people were literally queuing up in front of the shop to get a few cubes for them. And from then on, we started to see them all over the city. For instance, you see they're used as seating in restaurants, but we could have picked up many other examples of cafes and even sports halls using them for that kind of use, or they were also put to use as shelves in different shops. There was even an exhibition using them as pedestal to display the models in this architecture exhibition. Or even here, a much more unexpected use as a sort of outdoor partition wall and even as a litter bin. So somehow these cubes have become part of the everyday landscape of Brussels. But as you can imagine, not all materials sell like hotcakes. Let me give you another example. So it dates from the very beginning of Rotor DC as a sort of autonomous project. So we are in 2014, and we had then the opportunity to salvage some materials and furniture from former university buildings in the region of Liège. And one of the rooms that caught our attention, was this auditorium, which was entirely made of beautiful solid oak furniture, tables, benches, foldable seats, super beautiful, super well crafted. And because we were under the charm of this element, and because its destiny was otherwise to be just discarded with the rest of the demolition waste, we decided to dismantle it, or most of it, because we thought there would be a great demand for this type of elements. But it didn't exactly go according to the plan. Somehow, there was no real demand for these long benches with folding seats. And in retrospect, this may sound logical. They were perfectly suited for this 1930s auditorium, but maybe a little bit less so for contemporary use. And it's also not every day that an auditorium is built, and usually when it happens, it's a more contemporary style. So these benches stayed in our warehouse for quite a long time. And at some point we had to do it because you have to imagine that each square meter that is occupied in a warehouse, especially if you operate within the city, as it is the case for Rotor DC, you have to have a certain turnover, so you cannot afford to keep things forever in the warehouse. They take the place of other possibly reusable elements. So we decided to cut these benches up into smaller pieces, thinking that that would meet a demand. But there again, it wasn't exactly a success. So in the end, what happened is that we simply dismantled all the foldable seats, the small surfaces where you can sit on, and these found their way into new designs and new projects. And for the rest of the structure, we either reused it ourselves or gave it away. So you see, it can be a tough task to create this sense of value, and sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it just fails. Now, we would like to share with you some insider's tricks that we do on a daily basis to create this sense of value, to inspire appreciation to what's around us and what's circulating around us in the daily environment. And as you will see, there are many components to this process, which also needs to span several steps. So let's start from the beginning, when the decision is made to change a building. And usually this change means that there will be some sort of demolition involved in the building, at least for some parts of the building, even if you retain more of it. And in order to prevent the generation of waste during the demolition, it is a good practice to carry out what we call a reclamation audit. So it's a kind of assessment in which we try to identify all the materials that have the potential to be reused and that should be treated apart from the global flows of demolition waste. In Belgium, this practice is not yet mandatory. However, there are many building owners, both public and private, that have taken up the habit to contract this kind of missions on a voluntary basis. And at Rotor, we therefore conduct them very regularly. And when we carry out this type of audit, we have to embrace a very empathetic approach to the different elements present in the building. We somehow have to believe, to have this faith that they shouldn't become waste, at least not by default. Of course, this assessment also draws on quite objective criteria that are needed to express this potential for reuse. Obviously, the cost of dismantling or the logistical issues that can come with it, or the presence of hazardous materials are factors that will reduce or even eliminate the potential for reuse. On the other hand, if you have like materials with a very high architectural quality or elements that are present in huge quantities or materials with high performances or simply materials that are aesthetically pleasant, then you build up the potential for reuse. And we try to take all these factors into account, of course, when we conduct this reclamation audit. And when you look at the result of this kind of audit, which is this kind of long list of items with like objective description of them, you may have the impression that it is the result of a relatively cold and maybe purely approach, something that maybe a robot could probably do just as well. However, we believe that there is something more to it. Making such a list is also a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, a performative act, if you want to express it in linguistic terms, something that happens because you say it. So by saying that a material is reusable, that is exactly when we create this potential for the material to be reused. And at that stage, we may not know very well how this process will end up. There might be many things that will prevent it from, that will prevent this potential from being actualized into an actual reuse. A lot can still happen, but it is by saying that there is a potential for reuse that we create this appreciation, this first step for appreciation, and that we open up this possibility for future reuse.
Then there are issues related to processing and conditioning. To find a new use, certain materials need to be cleaned, resized, revised, grouped with similar elements, or sorted into homogeneous batches. This is a glued laminated timber beam, freshly dismantled on a demolition site. This beam is getting remilled here with the aim of transforming them into glulam timber panels, making them logistically easier to store and to transport. But it also opens up possibilities for reuse. Here you can see the process of grinding of joints and mortar residues from salvaged marble slabs, aiming to create uniform batches in terms of size and finishing, making reinstallation easier. Another example that proved to be at the moment slightly too expensive is cleaning and descaling of wall-hung toilets. Yeah, the competition of new equivalents was unbeatable for the price it costs. But more than anything, there are symbolic stakes. The way we can give objects a future is the act of attaching a story to them, taking good pictures, giving them the proper descriptions, giving them a character, finding ways to reconnect with those objects. In this sense, Rotor DC's showroom can be seen as a large alchemy lab where we are trying to restore a certain value, but also a certain dignity to the materials. This goes with assemblies, contrasts, demonstration, subtle shifts. Today, these methods are still very much held back by economic limits. An organization like Rotor DC focuses on materials that are technically reusable and economically viable, but those are just a tiny slice of all the elements that are theoretically reusable. The main thing, of course, holding this back is the competition from new materials, which are mass-produced and often rely on global supply chains. These are images from Rotor, taken in the tile workshop, where mortar residues are removed from the back of the tiles using diamond plates. We used to clean them manually with a hammer and chisel. The machine has, of course, made this process quicker, but it still represents intensive labor. So, you will see it in the exhibition as well, there is a real question about labor linked to this kind of practices. And this question is also very present in the films of Bêka Lemoine. Salvage and reuse involve a lot of manual work, and in an economy that struggles to recognize the value of labor, this poses a serious obstacle to reuse. Transforming this is, of course, a massive task that will require a big shift in society's mindset. And as you might as well notice in the exhibition, there is probably also a point to make about gender when it comes to this kind of work.
So if labor and recognizing the importance of manual labor in the economy is maybe one of the first big challenge for developing a truly reuse economy. Another one would be how to break away from the association with heavy demolition. If we look at history, we see that reuse has flourished in the context of major urban transformation that usually involved the demolition of large parts of the urban fabric and generated huge flows of material and waste. Take, for instance, the transformation of Paris under Napoleon III and Baron Haussmann. Huge revamping of the city involving a lot of demolitions. It was everywhere at that time. You have to read Zola again to realize that. And at that time, reuse was also a booming business. A contractor like Achille Picard was a major player in the business. It is he and his team who won the public tender to demolish the ruins of the Tuileries Palace, which was set afire by the Commune of Paris in 1871, if my memory is okay. And it remained as a ruin in the landscape of the city. And after a few years, I think 10 years later or 12 years later, public authorities decided to get rid of that ruin and contracted that to a demolisher. And at that time, it was a custom to make a sort of bidding for that. So contractors were paying to access the demolition site because they would make their profit downstream by reselling the elements. And you see that Achille Picard, who got the offer also because he was the quickest to do that in only 6 months, which at that time was quite express. He kept the pediment of one of the Tuileries building as a sort of trophy on the entrance to their warehouse. I'll let you read the very charming description of his warehouse from the point of view of a journalist from Le Figaro a few years later, describing all the elements you would find there. I like the very last sentence where they talk about the boxes full of tiles, Delft tiles, that are becoming rare at that moment. And I think we still find them somehow on the reclamation market, but they are also rare now. So Paris, 19th century, but even more recently in the work of the designer Marcel Remarques that I touched upon in the introduction and on whom Rotor wrote a book quite recently. Actually, if we want to understand his production in the 1970s and 1980s, we have to acknowledge how intertwined it was with the huge development of infrastructure works in the context of a modernization of Belgium. And of course, there were many demolitions going on at that time as well. So old buildings that were demolished to make way for urban motorways or railways or business districts in the city centers and so on and so on. And it was from these demolitions that salvagers were able to source their best pieces. And so salvage and demolition were completely entangled, if I can use this word here. So where are we now regarding this entanglement? Salvage is still closely linked to demolition. However, what we see in our work is that the highest salvage rates are to be found in projects that make their best to retain original buildings, which make us say that the less you demolish, the better you salvage. Moins on démolit, mieux on récupère, and not the other way around. There is a logical explanation to that, because when you demolish a complete building from the top to the basement, of course you have to deal with huge flows of materials in a usually short amount of time, and it leaves not a lot of room for salvage. Similarly, when you rebuild this building, you also need large flows of new materials that have to enter the site to rebuild it anew. And for the moment, only industry can provide this amount of elements on time and in the required quantities. And nowadays, most of the construction industry revolves around this principle. And in this context, reclaimed materials, but also bio-based materials or very low carbon impact materials are struggling to meet this kind of demand. On the contrary, if you try to retain as much of an existing building as possible, then you greatly reduce the amount of materials that needs to be disposed of, but also the amount of materials that needs to be brought to the site. And this leaves much more space for salvage and reuse, or at least that is the theory.
In practice, making this shift, so working with what already exists, is not so simple. And we have been living this every day since we moved to a new site for activities in the summer of 2022. The site is located in Evere, right on the edge of the Brussels region. It is about 14,000 square meters and includes an old industrial building from the late 1980s, a mix of offices and warehouses. It is part of a larger business park managed by CityDev. The area has something of an urban terminus, if you can say so, hosting activities that can't find their space in the urban tissue of Brussels, but would like to keep their headquarters within the Brussels administrative border. This includes institutions like the Belgian defense on the bottom of the map, the NATO postal dispatch centers, transport terminals, but somehow this monofunctional area is starting to change with new mixed-use projects popping up and adding more diversity to this area or this zone. This image shows the building just a few months before we moved. If you have already visited our shop, you will notice the difference. For those who haven't, I will leave you the surprise. And here you see the warehouses in the back of the site, surrounded by neatly mouthed lawn. In our previous warehouses in Anderlecht and Vilvoorde, we had temporary leases. Here, Rotor DC is about to sign a 30-year lease, which is a big shift for us and brings a whole new perspective on the future of our activities in Brussels. As a matter of principle, but also due to lack of resources, we chose to retain the building rather than demolish it and start from scratch. This approach comes with daily challenges. You need to be constantly flexible and adapt your practice to suit the building rather than making the building fit your practices. It's a process of gradually learning what a building is made of, how it works, what it can offer by observations, hands-on research, finding out how people use it, using archives, expert assessment, and so on. Adapt to a lower performance level, especially when it comes to energy efficiency and our idea of comfort. We think this approach is really promising, not just because it's of its environmental benefits, but also because it gives us a chance to rethink how we approach architecture. Somewhere about a year ago, we submitted a project under the regional ERDF FEDER call to allow us to pursue these ambitions as far as possible. We see huge potential in reimagining a way of practicing architecture that is more in line with the ecological and social challenges we face. I'm ending on this image of our back door, number H, where you notice as well that nature has been reclaiming its space. And to put this practice of working with the existing in the words of the critic Pierre Chabard, cette pratique mobilise autrement l'ensemble des compétences conceptuelles, techniques et esthétiques de l'architecte pour produire, sans ajouter de nouveaux bâtiments, une architecture inclusive, inventive, composite, une architecture d'agentivité plutôt que de la forme, de la maintenance plutôt que de la performance, de la durée plutôt que de l'espace.
Comme Victoria et Michael vous l'ont présenté, Rotor s'attelle à des pratiques de réemploi qui interrogent les méthodes de conception traditionnelles en mettant l'accent sur l'observation du déjà là. Au fil des années, Rotor a visité beaucoup de bâtiments, de sites et d'entrepôts de compagnies actives dans la récupération de matériaux en Belgique et dans les pays voisins. Sollicité par A+ et Bozar pour la mise en place d'une exposition, Rotor a souhaité aller au-delà du simple constat de ces pratiques en prenant du recul pour interroger l'économie des matériaux dans son ensemble. Cette démarche encourage une réflexion plus profonde sur les dynamiques en jeu et explore comment les pratiques circulaires intègrent un système économique plus vaste. Pour ce faire, Rotor a mené une recherche semblable à celle appliquée à leurs inventaires et à Opalis en allant visiter des sites, des infrastructures et des paysages où des matériaux sont produits, transformés, réutilisés ou éliminés.
Rotor wilde deze bezoeken vastleggen door middel van bewegend beeld. En daarom werkten we samen met het Frans-Italiaanse en internationaal bekende cineastenduo Bêka en Louise Lemoine. Bêka en Lemoine slaagden erin om in 9 kortfilms van elk ongeveer 10 minuten de essentie van evenveel industriële sites vast te leggen. Allemaal binnen een straal, het is al gezegd vanavond, van 200 kilometer rond Brussel. Deze precieze selectie biedt een kritische reflectie op de productieketens van bouwmaterialen en de limieten van hun circulariteit. Samen vormen deze films de ruggengraat van de tentoonstelling Entangled Matter en treden ze in dialoog met het werk van Rotor van de afgelopen 18 jaar, dat in de expo wordt getoond. We nodigen jullie daarom uit om jullie onder te dompelen in elk van deze 9 gepresenteerde films en na te denken over de interactie tussen mensen, machines, materialen en landschap. We nodigen jullie ook uit om de projecten, documenten en duidingen van Rotor te bekijken, om meer te weten te komen over hun diepgaande en genuanceerde visie op de verstrengelde materie van de bouwindustrie. Rotor en heel het tentoonstellingsteam willen graag alle bedrijven bedanken die zo vriendelijk waren om hun deuren en faciliteiten deuren te openen en hun faciliteiten te laten bezoeken en hun activiteiten te laten filmen. Hun bereidwilligheid om samen te werken en hun kennis en hun bereidheid om hun kennis te delen was cruciaal voor dit project. We danken daarom van harte Carmeuse, Carrière de la Azote, De Meuter, Immobilière du Terry de Pont de Loup, Merbe Sprimont en Oxfam Impact Furniture. 9 films van 10 minuten om te bekijken, scherpe zaalteksten om te lezen en boeiende objecten om te bestuderen. Een aandachtig bezoek van deze tentoonstelling vergt al gauw 2 uur. Hou daarom allemaal jullie toegangsticket van deze lezing goed bij, want het gaat jullie de gelegenheid geven om binnen een maand opnieuw naar de tentoonstelling te komen kijken. Vanavond hebben jullie tijd om even een vluchtige blik te werpen op de films, op de objecten. Blijf niet lang hangen, geef iedereen de gelegenheid om er even door te lopen en kom binnen de maand terug. Maar let wel op, het ticket dit aanbod is maar geldig tot 14 november.
Donc, comme vient de vous le dire Iwan, nous sommes ravis de vous voir nombreux et nombreuses ce soir, mais nous devons vous informer que le circuit d'exposition a une capacité restreinte. Vous ne pourrez donc pas tous et toutes avoir accès à l'exposition ce soir. On vous propose de revenir la visiter à un autre moment dans le courant du mois, en sachant que le ticket d'accès de cette conférence-ci, de ce soir, vous donne la possibilité de revenir pour prendre le temps nécessaire à la visite de l'exposition, et ce, jusqu'au 14 novembre prochain. Pour information, sachez que le prochain numéro d'A+ Architecture in Belgium sera coédité par Rotor et sortira en décembre prochain. D'ici là, vous pourrez découvrir dans l'exposition une sélection de publications en lien avec les pratiques de Rotor et l'exposition Entangled Matter. Avant de vous laisser découvrir tout cela, je tiens à remercier toute l'équipe qui a travaillé sur l'exposition du côté de Rotor, évidemment Michael et Victoria, mais aussi Arne, Alix, Tom, Louise, Karen, Gaspard, Louis, Olivia et Marthe, ainsi que mon équipe chez A+, Amaryllis, Éline, Céline, Grégoire, Giliana, Chirine, Déborah et Rita, ainsi que Lisa, avec qui on a initié le projet il y a 2 ans et demi maintenant. Pour le soutien qu'on a reçu du côté de Bozar, je tiens à remercier Christophe, Zoé, Evelyne, Axel et Juliette, ainsi que Frédéric, Gert, Damien, Colin, Alex, Julie, Samir et Tanguy pour leur soutien technique. Merci aussi à tous les membres du personnel, aux art handlers et aux techniciens. Ça fait beaucoup de remerciements. Merci aussi à Ila, Bêka et Louise Lemoine pour leur accompagnement tout au long du processus de réflexion pour la mise en place de cette exposition et la production des 9 courts-métrages qu'ils ont produits pour l'occasion. Merci aussi à Julia et Sarah qui les ont assistés. On a pris un grand plaisir à prendre en charge la curatelle de cette exposition avec Iwan. Il faut dire que Rotor a grandement facilité tout le processus, ayant une expertise certaine en la matière. Alors pour ça, merci à Rotor, dont Arne qui s'est attelé avec Michael au texte que vous lirez dans l'exposition, et surtout un grand merci à la super équipe de coordination du projet, Michael, Victoria et Alix. On vous invite maintenant à vous rendre dans le hall Horta pour célébrer avec nous l'ouverture de l'exposition et profiter de votre soirée.